We would like to start by defining some terms that will be frequently used throughout the presentation. First, we have limiting resources, which are environmental features that limit the abundance or distribution of a population of an organism in an ecosystem. They can be biotic, like competition over resources, such as food or mates, or abiotic, like soil moisture, soil temperature, available space for the Japanese beetle, and available host plants. So, when these resources are abundant, the Japanese beetle population should increase, causing more damage. Since the Japanese beetle has very abundant limiting resources, their population can grow exponentially. An invasive species is a non-indigenous species that completely dominates an entire ecosystem and becomes invasive when they have a scarce amount of a limiting resource. Introduction of an invasive species is when a non-native organism is transported to the new location by humans through trade or migration. Establishment of an invasive species is when there is a sustainable population to continue existence that disrupts the ecosystem it colonizes. And finally, quarantine, which is what Utah is currently doing, contains active efforts and use of trapping and insecticides to control the Japanese beetle population. Next, we'd like to give you a little bit of a background on the Japanese beetle's biology and history. So the Japanese beetle was introduced to the US in 1916 and originally came from Japan. It's not an invasive species in Japan due to scarce limiting resources, meaning that there's lots of competition over resources to survive. This keeps the Japanese beetle population in Japan lower than the Japanese beetle population in the US. Invasive beetle species in the US are estimated to have a total cost of about $450 million per year. In addition, the Japanese beetle feeds on over 300 plus different plant species across the US. If you look at the photo in the top right corner, you can see how the Japanese beetle skeletonizes the plant leaves. This can end up killing the plant or reducing yield. Their damage is then amplified by the fact that they tend to feed in mass groupings in a small area. One study even found, on average, 17,000 beetles per peach tree on 156 trees in total. An example of this grouping is shown in the bottom right corner. The Japanese beetle larvae also cause damages by feeding on grass roots, causing grass to roll up like a carpet. And finally, the average lifespan of a Japanese beetle is about 1 year, and they typically lay about 40 to 60 eggs in the soil during their lifespan.
Utah is one of the few states that is currently Japanese beetle free, being neither partially nor generally infested, though it was at risk for infestation in 2006. When a Japanese beetle population was discovered in Orem, Utah. In collaboration with the city of Orem, the Utah Department of Agriculture and Food decided to take on an eradication effort unprecedented in size to rid the state of Japanese beetle. By 2011, not a single Japanese beetle was found, and 3 years later it was declared eradicated. Since that time, the Utah Department of Agriculture and Food has maintained a quarantine against Japanese beetle, costing about $60,000 annually. At the request of the department, our study seeks to answer the question if the potential impacts of the Japanese beetle on Utah agriculture warrant this continued expense. Though the Japanese beetle does pose a threat to all of Utah agriculture with its large list of potential host plants, due to time and data constraints, we have focused our efforts on calculating the impact to corn and turf grass in Utah.
Let's break down what we chose to include in calculating the costs and the benefits of the decision for Utah to maintain the quarantine or not. The estimated cost of quarantine is based on expenses reported by the Utah Department of Agriculture on the current annual cost to control the Japanese beetle population. The benefits are then broken into corn and turf. The benefit of corn is measured by the forecasted losses in corn revenue if Utah doesn't control the Japanese beetle population. And the turf benefit is calculated from the cost to replace existing turf in Utah that the Japanese beetle could destroy if quarantine is not maintained. So, if the costs are greater than the benefit, Utah Agricultural Department should not continue to quarantine. If the costs are less than the benefit, the Utah Agricultural Department should continue to quarantine.
Yield of corn was forecast through 2027 to allow adequate time for a Japanese beetle population of significant size to establish itself in Utah. Forecasting was done using two methods. First, using statistical regression to produce the equation displayed, and second, using a weighted historical growth model which derived weighted growth rates from 25 years of historical data. The most conservative estimates from both methods of forecasting were weighted together to forecast 2027 Utah corn yield at 6,992,812 bushels. Using the most recent price of $4.50 from the Utah Department of Agriculture and Food's 2019 Utah Agricultural Statistics and Annual Summary Report, this yield equates to a value of $31,467,654. The worst-case scenario of losses to corn is based upon a 10 bushels per acre loss obtained from another study. We have also included a moderate and best-case scenario at losses of 8 bushels and 6 bushels respectively. The worst-case scenario at a loss of 10 bushels per acre equates to losses of $2,132,995. At 8 bushels, $1,706,396, and at 6 bushels, $1,279,797.
We used an ArcGIS datasheet that contained land use in the state of Utah for each county. We then transferred the data to Excel and eliminated areas that didn't fit requirements for the Japanese beetle to survive, such as temperature, soil moisture, and land topography. We specifically looked at urban areas in Utah with turf and eliminated areas without irrigation methods. This left areas with sprinkler irrigation methods. Then we'd gathered average temperatures for each county for June, July, and August. For each county outside the survival range of 59 degrees to 88 degrees, we calculated a discount rate so that counties with temperatures further outside the temperature range use a smaller percentage of the square meters of turf, which indicates that less land will be invaded by the Japanese beetle. As you can see, we also applied another discount rate to indicate best, most likely, and worst case scenarios. A discount rate to every county of 80% for our best case scenario means we only expect about 20% of the turf to be damaged or 20% of the total turf to be occupied by the Japanese beetle. We did this because the Japanese beetle tends to aggregate in small areas, and this also allows us to create different scenarios of expected damage. The cost of damage is then calculated by taking the square feet multiplied by the cost of turf replacement at 69 cents per square foot. Let's break down what we chose to include in calculating the costs and the benefits of the decision for Utah to maintain the quarantine or not. The estimated cost of quarantine is based on expenses reported by the Utah Department of Agriculture on the current annual cost to control the Japanese beetle population. The benefits are then broken into corn and turf. The benefit of corn is measured by the forecasted losses in corn revenue if Utah doesn't control the Japanese beetle population. And the turf benefit is calculated from the cost to replace existing turf in Utah that the Japanese beetle could destroy if quarantine is not maintained. So, if the costs are greater than the benefit, Utah Agricultural Department should not continue to quarantine. If the costs are less than the benefit, the Utah Agricultural Department should continue to quarantine.
Based upon our findings of the accumulated annual cost of maintaining the quarantine representing less than 1% of only a fraction of the potential losses to Utah agriculture, we recommend the Utah Department of Agriculture and Food continue to maintain the quarantine against Japanese beetle.